Under the blistering Mediterranean sun, the Roman training ground shimmered with heat and fear. The air stank of sweat, iron, and the faint, metallic scent of blood already spilled that morning. Rows of recruits stood trembling, stripped of individuality, facing the centurion whose face was carved from cruelty. A command cut through the silence like a blade, and the men began to march barefoot over smouldering coals. The ground hissed under their skin, and the smell of burnt flesh rose like an offering to Mars. No one screamed aloud. The punishment for weakness was worse than the pain itself. Every man knew this was no mere trial. This was transformation through agony. The Romans did not train soldiers. They forged instruments of war, tempered in suffering and silence. To flinch was to fail, and failure meant lashes, humiliation, or death before one's brothers in arms. Each strike of the vine staff across a back was a sermon in discipline and obedience. The centurion's eyes did not blink as his men bled. Mercy was treason to the Roman creed. The lesson was simple: pain is not your enemy. Hesitation is. The Roman legion was born in brutality, where empathy was crushed out of boys before they became men. They were taught to march until their feet broke, to fight until their souls hardened into stone. The Republic demanded not courage, but submission to something greater, an empire built on endurance and fear. To survive, one had to learn to suffer beautifully, to die without trembling, to obey without thought. Each morning, soldiers lifted heavy wooden shields soaked in water until their arms trembled from exhaustion. They practiced stabbing sandbags endlessly, learning that hesitation in battle meant death in reality. Their commanders called it training, but in truth it was ritualized torture disguised as honor. The Roman ideal of virtues, meant nothing without blood to prove it. The body was merely clay, pain was the sculptor that shaped it into a weapon. For centuries, this method created the most disciplined killing force in the ancient world. The legions conquered continents, but first, they conquered their own humanity. To the outside world, they were invincible. To themselves, they were already ghosts. Rome's strength did not come from courage, but from the extinction of weakness. Behind every triumphal arch and golden laurel lay unseen, screams buried beneath the empire's marble skin. Pain was not punishment. It was the price of perfection, and the Legionnaire's oath was not loyalty to Rome, but to the agony that made him worthy of Rome. By the time a man earned his armor, he no longer feared death. He had already met it. The process was simple yet horrific. Break the body, bend the will, burn away the soul, and from that fire emerged something terrifying, a man who had learned to love his suffering. In Rome's relentless pursuit of power, pain was the forge, and men were the molten metal. Their screams echoed across centuries, though history called it glory. But in truth, glory was only the shadow cast by endurance. For the Roman legionnaire, the path to honor began not with triumph, but with torment. And as the fires of training died down, another truth remained. Only those who endured pain could command it. This was no army of men. It was an empire of scars, and every scar told the same story: that Rome's greatness was built through suffering no mortal should survive. Power in Rome was never gentle. It was a blade hidden beneath the illusion of order. Every commander ruled not by respect, but by fear, sharp enough to cut through disobedience. The Legionnaire's discipline wasn't born from loyalty. It was carved into their bones through torment and terror. A centurion's vine staff could end a man's life faster than an enemy spear. Public beatings were not punishments. They were performances of power meant to remind men who ruled. 1 lash taught obedience. 10 lashes erased memory. 100 made a man forget his name. The higher the rank, the deeper the cruelty. For cruelty was proof of strength. In the camp, the soldier learned that compassion was rebellion and pity was weakness. Fear became a language, and every Roman learned to speak it fluently. The commanders understood one truth: a man who fears pain will obey anything to avoid it. It was not hatred that kept the Roman legions in line, but the dread of defiance. Under generals like Marius and Sulla, discipline became divine, and suffering became sacred. The army turned into a living shrine to control, where every wound was a prayer to Rome. Officers broke spirits as easily as bones, believing a shattered soul was easier to command. They fed their soldiers not just bread and salt, but humiliation and silence. Each punishment was designed not merely to correct, but to erase individuality entirely. A legionnaire was not a man. He was a function, a cog in the machine of empire. When Augustus rose, he perfected this machinery, blending obedience with spectacle and fear with faith. Even the emperor's paranoia seeped into the ranks. Spies, whispers, informers everywhere. One careless word could end a life. One doubtful glance could mean crucifixion. The emperor was a god in name, but his divinity was maintained by mortal suffering. Legionnaires were taught that their pain sustained not only their honor, but Rome's very existence. If one man faltered, 100 paid the price. If one fled, 10 died in his place. Such was the genius of Roman control. Terror distributed so precisely it became invisible. The soldiers didn't fight for gold, or glory, or Rome. They fought to escape punishment. Each victory was a reprieve, not a reward. Each battle, a test of endurance more than courage. The chain of command was forged from fear thicker than any iron link. The centurion's cruelty was never questioned, for mercy could infect an entire cohort. Rome had no room for empathy. Emotion was a luxury reserved for the conquered. By instilling terror in every rank, the empire ensured its legions were both weapon and wall. No ruler trusted loyalty alone. They trusted fear to hold faster than love ever could. Paranoia ran from the emperor's palace down to the campfire of every legion. Each man watched the next. Each feared the other, and together they obeyed without hesitation. This was the Roman paradox: unity built through suspicion, strength born from suffering. The result was an army unbreakable in battle, but broken within. They did not conquer because they believed in Rome, but because they feared what would happen if they failed. In time, that same fear would turn inward, consuming the masters who had once commanded it. It began with silence, the kind that makes even the bravest men feel the weight of their heartbeat. 10 soldiers were drawn from the ranks, chosen not for their crimes, but for their misfortune. They had fled in battle, or so the commander claimed, and now Rome demanded repayment in blood. Each man stared at the ground, waiting for fate to speak through the cold toss of a lot. One name was drawn, one doomed man among brothers who now had to become his executioners. The others stepped back, trembling because survival now meant murder sanctioned by discipline. The chosen soldier begged for mercy, his voice breaking like brittle glass in the dry air. But mercy was treason in Rome. Compassion was a disease that could spread and destroy entire legions. The centurion gave no speech, no comfort, only the order: do your duty. And so the men raised stones, clubs, and fists, turning brotherhood into ritualized slaughter. Each blow landed not just on the victim's flesh, but on the killer's souls, sealing their obedience forever. The condemned man's screams echoed across the field until they faded into the rhythm of blows. When it was done, his body lay broken, a silent warning carved in human form. The men stood covered in his blood, knowing they had proven loyalty by destroying a friend. No enemy could make them hesitate again, not after killing their own to survive. This was decimation, the most feared punishment in Roman military law. Every 10th man executed by the hands of his comrades for collective cowardice, a mathematical cruelty designed to multiply terror rather than justice. Commanders like Crassus used it during the Spartacus revolt, when discipline faltered and fear was needed more than food. Those who survived bore scars that no sword could inflict, living ghosts of Rome's doctrine of fear. The decimation was not random madness. It was Rome's twisted logic turned into law. To disobey was to die. To obey was to kill innocence inside oneself. It made cowards brave and brave men hollow. The brilliance of the punishment was its cruelty. It punished failure by turning loyalty into guilt. The emperor's historians later glorified it as necessary for maintaining virtues, the strength of Rome. But even in their writings, Shadows bled through between the lines, whispers of nightmares endured. The victims' bodies were buried quickly, but the memory of the act rotted in every survivor. Fear became the pulse of the legion, and obedience became a second nature, stronger than blood. New recruits learned of decimation as legend, a tale that made courage less about honor and more about survival. Every soldier dreamed of victory not for Rome's glory, but to avoid another drawing of lots. In campfires, they spoke of it in hushed tones, never knowing when the centurion might be listening. The ritual worked. Armies that should have fled stood their ground, preferring death in battle to execution in camp. Rome had found the perfect weapon, not the gladius, not the shield, but the human mind itself. Through fear, it achieved the impossible. Absolute control. Even the barbarians who faced the legions could not understand how men so haunted could fight so hard. They saw discipline, but they did not see the ghosts walking beside each Roman soldier. Each victory was built on bones. Each triumph soaked in the blood of comrades turned executioners. This was Rome's secret. The empire did not conquer with courage, but with the terror of disobedience. And in that terror, an empire was both forged and cursed. In Rome, cruelty was not confined to the battlefield. It was cultivated in marble halls and golden thrones. The Senate whispered of honor, yet every decree dripped with paranoia and hidden daggers. Emperors ruled not only through armies, but through the fear that their armies might turn on them. Every general was both a servant and a threat. Every victory, a possible rebellion in disguise. Behind closed doors, spies and informers thrived. Rome's true legions were built of rumors and betrayal. The same discipline that crushed soldiers also chained the empire's rulers to their own delusions. Caligula humiliated his officers before parades, forcing commanders to crawl before his horse. Domitian executed entire cohorts over imagined insults, his paranoia spreading faster than disease. Power in Rome was never stable. It fed on treachery. It demanded sacrifice to survive. Each emperor learned that cruelty was not a choice. It was the price of peace. In the barracks, fear of disobedience. In the palace, fear of conspiracy. The empire was united by suspicion, from the poorest legionnaire to the emperor draped in purple. To the people, Rome appeared unshakable. To those within, it trembled like a blade drawn too tight. Senators plotted with generals, generals bribed soldiers, and soldiers watched for spies pretending to be comrades. Discipline bled into deceit. Every salute could hide an intention to kill. The emperor's decrees traveled with both coin and blood, for every order carried hidden enemies. When Nero feared rebellion, he turned his paranoia into performance. Public tortures as imperial theatre. Citizens applauded, not out of joy, but to prove they were not next. In the camps, soldiers learned that the emperor's madness was their command. A legion could be destroyed not by an enemy's sword, but by an emperor's fear. Rome became a machine powered by cruelty, efficient, relentless, soulless. Religious rituals cloaked the horror. Sacrifices to Mars, chants for victory, prayers over mutilated bodies. Faith and brutality fused, each sanctifying the other. Priests blessed the whips before they struck flesh, calling it divine purification. Hypocrisy became sacred. Mercy, blasphemy. The empire pretended to serve the gods, but it truly worshipped control. In every corner of the court, secrets fermented like rot beneath gold leaf. Senators smiled in public and poisoned in private. Commanders feasted beside emperors one night and died by dawn the next. Loyalty lasted only until fear changed. Direction. The army reflected its rulers, disciplined on the surface, paranoid within. Every man who wielded authority feared being destroyed by it. Whispers of rebellion never ceased, for cruelty had taught Rome's rulers to trust no one. The Praetorian Guard, once protectors, became brokers of power, selling thrones for coin and blood. They killed emperors as easily as they guarded them, shifting allegiance like merchants at a market. Rome's heart, once iron, was now corruption clothed in ritual. Power devoured itself in slow, deliberate bites, and every bite tasted like victory. The Senate pretended to rule. The emperor pretended to be divine. The people pretended to believe. In the end, Rome's greatest lie was its illusion of control, a structure built from fear pretending to be faith. The same hands that forged discipline in soldiers now trembled under the weight of deceit. The empire was still expanding outward, but inside, it was rotting alive, and those who served it, soldier, senator, or emperor, were all prisoners of the same invisible chain. The cruelty of Rome did not end on the battlefield. It seeped into the bloodstream of society itself. Every citizen learned early that pain was not a curse but a currency of virtue. Roman fathers whipped their sons to toughen them, believing tenderness bred weakness. Mothers watched with pride as boys endured wounds without tears, the first proof of manhood. The amphitheater became Rome's classroom, where suffering was applauded as entertainment and death was a lesson. The crowd cheered not for mercy, but for endurance, the ability to die beautifully, without fear. Gladiators bled for applause, soldiers bled for empire, slaves bled for nothing, yet all served the same ideal. Virtue in Rome meant survival through agony. Compassion was considered a foreign disease. Philosophers like Seneca preached stoicism while slaves were crucified outside their villas. To endure was holy, to feel was shameful. Religion wrapped itself around brutality like ivy on a tomb. Priests claimed Mars demanded sacrifice and Jupiter rewarded pain with divine favor. The temples smelled of incense and dried blood, where faith was measured in screams offered to the gods. Pain became proof of devotion, and those who did not suffer were deemed unworthy of Rome's blessings. Even art mirrored cruelty. Statues of warriors, paintings of conquest, mosaics drenched in scenes of death. Poets glorified war not for victory, but for the beauty of destruction. Virgil's verses sang of courage, but beneath every line lay the echo of slaughter. Commoners idolized the soldiers' endurance, dreaming of glory while knowing the cost was their humanity. The legionnaires' wounds were badges of honor. The crippled veteran was a living monument to Rome's will. Children played games reenacting executions, laughing as they mimicked decimation with stones and sticks. Violence was education, and obedience was faith. The cult of strength consumed every aspect of Roman life, until even love became conquest. Marriage, politics, and religion all obeyed the law of dominance and submission. The weak existed to serve, and the strong existed to rule. Rome's social order reflected its army. Hierarchy enforced through fear disguised as discipline. The nobility celebrated cruelty as refinement, calling it virtue polished by civilization. Meanwhile, peasants and slaves absorbed their masters' values, mistaking endurance for dignity. The more Rome expanded, the more it exported this ideology of sacred suffering. Conquered tribes learned Roman law through the lash, and Roman faith through the flame. Temples rose where native gods once stood, each one built upon bones of the defiant. Romanization was not enlightenment, it was assimilation through terror. Over centuries, this belief hardened into moral stone. Power justifies pain, pain sanctifies power. Legionnaires returning home carried more than scars. They carried Rome's sickness in their minds. They were honored, but hollow, incapable of peace, addicted to command and cruelty. Families feared their own sons, who spoke only the language of authority and silence. Trauma became tradition, passed from fathers to sons like inheritance. Rome created a world that worshipped pain and called it progress. Even in its art, laws, and philosophy, one truth persisted. Suffering was sacred, and mercy was weakness. And when Rome looked upon its empire, it saw not oppression but perfection reflected in the blood of its subjects. In its quest to civilize the world, it had only taught humanity how to suffer more efficiently. There always comes a moment when fear devours its own master. For Rome, that moment had begun. The very discipline that once made her invincible started to rot her from within. Centuries of cruelty had bred soldiers who obeyed orders but no longer believed in purpose. The empire's borders stretched thin, but its heart was crumbling, hollowed by exhaustion and madness. In distant provinces, legions began to rebel, not out of ambition, but from despair. They had seen too much blood, endured too much pain, and found no meaning left in it. The flame that once forged heroes now consumed them from the inside out. Officers flogged men for muttering prayers, unaware that faith had become the only rebellion left. In the eastern camps, soldiers turned to secret cults, worshipping Mithras, seeking salvation in the shadows. They no longer trusted Rome's gods. They trusted the silence of caves where tears were allowed. The myth of Roman perfection began to crack, revealing men haunted by their own obedience. Veterans wandered home unable to sleep, killing strangers in taverns when memories returned. The empire that prided itself on control was now ruled by ghosts of its own making. When emperors demanded more discipline, the soldiers responded with indifference instead of fear. The whip no longer terrified. It simply reminded them that nothing mattered anymore. Battlefields filled with men who fought mechanically, without faith, without rage, only habit. Rome's greatest weapon, obedience, had become its curse. In the face of rebellion, commanders invoked decimation again, but the men refused to draw lots. The ritual that once enforced unity now symbolized meaningless cruelty. Some legions slaughtered their own officers, crying that Rome had become worse than her enemies. The fear that built the empire had lost its power once men stopped fearing life itself. Every lash, every crucifixion, every burned village came back to Rome like a mirror of judgment. In the Senate, whispers spread that the gods had abandoned the empire. Plagues, rebellions, and mutinies tore through the provinces like divine retribution. The emperor's statues were toppled by soldiers who once saluted them with trembling loyalty. The same hands that built Rome's dominion now dismantled it piece by piece. The psychological empire collapsed before the political one, a slow implosion of meaning. Veterans spoke of dreams filled with fire, with the faces of those the steel that had once defined them now rusted within their hearts. The turning point was not a single battle, but a realization. The gods they bled for were lies. The Roman soldier no longer feared punishment. He feared the emptiness that came after survival. And when an army ceases to believe in its own purpose, no empire, however mighty, can endure. Rome, once the master of fear, became its final victim. The fire that forged the legions had finally consumed the empire itself. When the fires of discipline finally dimmed, they left behind only ash and echoes of screams. Rome's might had conquered the known world, but it could not conquer the damage it had done to itself. The legions that once defined order became wandering ghosts across dying provinces. Disbanded soldiers turned mercenary, selling their brutality to whoever still had coin or ambition. Empires that followed copied Rome's methods, mistaking cruelty for structure and obedience for loyalty. The disease of Roman discipline infected the centuries that came after it. Historians like Tacitus and Suetonius wrote of glory, yet every line reeked of blood and regret. They tried to praise Rome's iron virtue, but their words trembled under the weight of its atrocities. The truth slipped through their parchment. Discipline had been Rome's armor and her poison. What began as order had decayed into obsession, a madness polished into doctrine. The perfect soldier became the perfect slave, and Rome mistook that for civilization. Generals of later ages worshipped her manuals, copying her cruelty as if it were wisdom. From Caesar to Napoleon, the lesson endured. Control men through pain. Call it greatness. Even in modern armies, echoes of Roman discipline remain. Dehumanize to strengthen, break to rebuild. Every drill, every shouted command, every punishment traces its lineage back to the Roman camp. Archaeologists still find the relics, whips, shackles, execution pits, buried beneath monuments to honor. They are Rome's true monuments, carved not in marble, but in suffering. The empire's shadow stretched far beyond its fall, shaping how humanity defined power itself. To this day, we admire efficiency, endurance, silence, all virtues born from Roman pain. We call it discipline, yet we forget it was once synonymous with terror. Rome taught the world that civilization requires sacrifice. It never specified whose. Its roads, its laws, its architecture still stand. but so does its lesson in cruelty. The historians who glorified it built their own prisons of perspective, chained to admiration for tyranny. Every time we honor empire, we honor the ghosts Rome left behind. The psychological machinery of control that Rome perfected became the blueprint for centuries of domination. Monarchs, generals, and dictators all borrowed her gospel: pain as order, fear as peace. The empire fell, but its methods did not. They lived on in every regime that measured loyalty in scars. Rome's cruelty became humanity's inheritance, passed down through uniforms, flags, and obedience drills. And though her marble has cracked, her cruelty endures in the systems we still call civilization. In the end, Rome's legacy was not greatness. It was the normalization of suffering disguised as glory. The smell of smoke and iron still lingers in memory. The sound of the hammer, the scream, the silence. Rome is gone, yet its spirit of control breathes quietly through every institution that fears chaos. The decimation may have ended, but its logic lives on: obedience through fear, unity through suffering. We call it order now, discipline, hierarchy. Yet its heartbeat is the same as Rome's. Every soldier trained to suppress pain, every worker conditioned to obey, walks a path once paved by legionnaires. The empire that forged men through agony still forges minds through pressure and conformity. Pain has simply changed its shape. It no longer burns the flesh, it burns the soul. Where Rome used whips, we use deadlines. Where it used crucifixion, we use shame. The world still worships endurance, still glorifies those who break and keep walking. We have inherited Rome's sickness, the belief that strength is proven only through suffering. In every arena, from war to office, echoes of the amphitheater remain. Performance under pain. And when we marvel at the discipline of armies or the silence of institutions, we are admiring Rome's ghost. The Legionnaires' march became humanity's rhythm, forward, unfeeling, unquestioning, unbroken. Yet beneath the rhythm lies a question that Rome never dared to ask. What is the cost of endurance? The men who survived her training lived without joy. The empire that demanded perfection died by its own design. Rome fell, not because it was weak, but because it mistook fear for strength and silence for loyalty. Its greatness was built on agony, and agony cannot sustain eternity. So when we speak of Rome's glory, we must also remember its graves, the anonymous millions who made it possible. They were not heroes, not villains, just human beings consumed by the machinery of empire. Their bones still whisper beneath the ruins. Was it worth it? And as we look at our own world, ordered, efficient, ruthless, we must ask the same. Because perhaps the Roman legion never truly died. It simply changed uniform. The empire lives wherever fear is called discipline and pain is renamed progress. The question that haunts history still burns. Are we forging strength or merely repeating Rome? And if pain is the forge, how many more centuries will we spend worshipping the fire?